Honestly, the mechanics of how this information came to light are just as significant as the information itself. We are dealing with a verifiable breach of digital communications, not rumors. So here where it gets interesting, the text messages did not come from an external cyber attack, but rather from a routine internal security audit of the encrypted royal server infrastructure commissioned by the Prince of Wales himself. To understand the gravity of this situation, we must step behind closed doors and observe the exact environment where the confrontation took place. It was early Tuesday morning in King Charles' private study at Clarence House. The room was quiet, heavily paneled in oak, with the morning light diffused through the heavy curtains. The king was seated behind his primary desk. He appeared heavily fatigued, his hands resting flat on the blotting paper. There was no anger visible in his posture, only a rigid formal resignation. Queen Camilla was present, positioned near the fireplace, holding a cup of tea. The atmosphere was strictly professional, devoid of the theatrical arguments often portrayed in the media. Precisely at 9:00 a.m., Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, entered the study. Catherine carried a single, leather-bound folio containing the printed transcripts of the server audit. The core of the issue stems from a series of text messages exchanged over a 6-month period. Catherine placed the folio on the desk in front of the king. The texts exposed a direct, private channel of communication between Queen Camilla and a consortium of senior press editors and independent PR consultants. The alliance was formed with a singular objective: to systematically redirect negative press scrutiny away from the Queen's inner circle and strategically funnel it toward Catherine and her immediate staff. Why did Camilla sign off on this alliance? The internal documentation suggests a calculated defensive strategy. Following a series of internal staffing transitions and minor public relations missteps involving her own charitable patronages, the Queen's team sought to insulate her public approval ratings. The text messages explicitly detailed instructions to leak minor, frustrating operational details about Catherine's office to ensure the daily news cycle remained focused on the Princess of Wales rather than the Queen. When Catherine addressed the room, her delivery was entirely clinical. She did not raise her voice. She walked the king through the timestamp messages, highlighting the exact moments where internal palace schedules were shared with external media figures before they were even finalized by the security teams. William stood beside her, his arms crossed, his focus entirely on his father. His reaction was one of cold, calculated furiousness. He did not yell. Instead, he outlined the exact security violations these leaks represented. King Charles' reaction was defined by absolute silence. He read through the highlighted transcripts one by one. The betrayal here was not just personal, it was a structural breach of the monarchy's operational integrity. Charles recognized instantly that the institution's internal trust had been compromised by his own wife. He adjusted his reading glasses, read the final page, and looked directly at Camilla. Camilla attempted to contextualize the messages, stating that the communications were taken out of context and were merely informal background briefings meant to manage the press, not weaponize it. Catherine immediately countered this by reading a specific text message verbatim, wherein Camilla explicitly approved a headline that framed Catherine as difficult to work with. The room remained completely silent as the words hung in the air. The implications of this meeting are vast. William made it unequivocally clear that his office would no longer share any advanced scheduling, medical, or logistical data with the King's office unless a strict, legally binding firewall was established. He effectively partitioned the monarchy's operations into two separate entities right there in the study. King Charles, caught between his duty to the crown and his marriage, was forced to make a structural decision. He signed a formal internal directive, drafted by William's legal team, immediately revoking Camilla's access to the central royal scheduling mainframe and terminating the employment of 2 of her senior aides who facilitated the text message transfers. We are witnessing a profound operational shift. The Princess of Wales did not just defend herself, she executed a flawless, evidence-based exposure of a shadow operation within the palace. The betrayal has fundamentally altered the family dynamics, replacing whatever remained of familial trust with strict, corporate-level security protocols. I will continue to monitor the fallout of these newly implemented firewalls. As the morning progressed, the immediate reality of the king's signature began to take effect. The study doors opened, and William and Catherine departed with the exact same clinical precision they entered with. They did not speak to the palace staff waiting in the corridor. They moved straight to their waiting vehicle, heading directly back to Adelaide Cottage to brief their own communications team. The visual of their departure was striking in its efficiency. There were no lingering conversations, only the execution of a highly coordinated exit. Back in the King's study, the atmosphere was dense and highly strained. Charles immediately summoned his private secretary. The execution of the directive meant severing the digital ties that connected Clarence House to Buckingham Palace's central servers. This was an unprecedented IT operation within the monarchy. The King sat at his desk, watching as the preliminary orders were drafted to restrict the Queen's access to the consolidated calendar. It was a mechanical, administrative dismantling of trust. The details of the leaked text messages began to circulate among a highly restricted group of senior royals. Princess Anne was briefed by Charles via secure phone line. Standing in her office at Gatcombe Park, Anne's reaction was strictly pragmatic. She viewed Camilla's secret alliance not just as a personal slight against Catherine, but as a severe liability to the institution's stability. Anne advised the King to permanently dismantle Camilla's independent press office and fold it entirely under his direct, monitored oversight. There was no emotional comfort offered, only strategic advice. Let us look at the specific mechanics of the alliance Camilla had formed. The text transcripts revealed a highly sophisticated network. Camilla's dismissed aides were using encrypted messaging applications to communicate with 3 specific media executives. The goal was to trade exclusive access to Camilla's charity events in exchange for placing negative, subtly critical stories about Catherine's recovery and workload. This was a transactional operation, meticulously documented in the data Catherine had provided. For instance, one text message sent by Camilla's proxy read, "Ensure the focus remains on the Wales's lack of public engagements this month. We will provide full access to the Queen's garden reception in return." This was a clear, verifiable exchange of royal access for targeted media manipulation. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate strategy to control the narrative at the expense of the Princess of Wales. By mid-afternoon, the structural separation demanded by Prince William was fully underway. Independent cybersecurity technicians arrived at Kensington Palace to physically isolate the Wales's digital infrastructure. Their medical records, travel itineraries, and private correspondence were permanently scrubbed from the shared royal database. The level of distrust was so profound that William insisted on utilizing former intelligence contractors to audit the new system, explicitly refusing to rely on the standard royal IT personnel. You have to understand what it looked like in the Queen's private quarters later that evening. Camilla was operationally isolated. Her 2 primary aides had been escorted off the premises by royal protection officers, their security passes revoked and their devices confiscated. She was left without her primary conduits to the press. Charles visited her apartments briefly, but the interaction was entirely transactional and brief. He informed her that all her future press releases would require approval from his own communications secretary. The autonomy she had carefully built over the past decade was dismantled in a single afternoon. The fallout extended to the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh. Sophie, who maintains a notoriously close and protective relationship with Catherine, received a summary of the situation. Sophie's response was swift and definitive. She immediately instructed her office to cancel a joint engagement previously scheduled with Camilla for the following month, citing a sudden, unresolvable diary clash. This was a polite, professional, but unmistakable withdrawal of support and in alignment with the Waleses. Now, let us examine the forensic reality of the text message leak. Catherine did not merely present printed pages, she presented a certified digital forensic report. The investigators traced the origin of the leaks back to a specific IP address associated with Camilla's private residential network. There was zero room for plausible deniability. The evidence was absolute, and Catherine delivered it without an ounce of vindictiveness, which made it all the more devastating. She treated it entirely as a corporate security breach. King Charles is now managing a fundamentally fractured institution. The text messages proved that his wife actively conspired against the future queen. To maintain public stability, the palace initiated a standard cover story for the sudden firing of the aides, issuing a brief statement that they were moving on to private sector opportunities. However, the internal reality is a complete operational quarantine. The strategy moving forward for the Prince and Princess of Wales is total, verifiable independence. They recognize that the threat came from within the highest ranks of the family structure. The ultimate betrayal was not just the leaking of information, but the deliberate attempt to manipulate public perception against a family member recovering from severe health challenges. Purely for PR self-preservation, William has made it clear that this crossing of the line is irreversible. Behind closed doors the next day, the king held an emergency summit with the keeper of the privy purse and the master of the household. The agenda was to rewrite the internal protocols governing staff communication. I watched as the king, looking visibly aged by the ordeal, signed off on a new zero-tolerance non-disclosure agreement that specifically prohibited any staff member from discussing one royal household with another. The operational walls between the King's Court and the Wales's Court were now legally enforced. Let us break down the exact contents of the secondary dossier Catherine provided during that initial meeting. While the first folio focused on media manipulation, the second detailed the financial resources used to facilitate this alliance. The logs indicated that Camilla's aides had been utilizing discretionary funds from specific patronages to host private dinners for these media executives. This crossed the line from a simple PR strategy to a misappropriation of charitable resources for personal image management. William's reaction to this financial component was severe and unyielding. He formally requested that the king audit all accounts connected to the Queen's discretionary spending. The Prince of Wales approached this with the ruthlessness of a corporate board member protecting a company's brand integrity. He made it clear to Charles that if the king did not handle the financial audit internally, William would escalate the matter to the independent royal auditors, forcing the issue into the light. Camilla's reaction to the financial audit was highly defensive. In a tense meeting in the drawing room later that week, she argued that relationship building with the press was a standard operational cost. Charles, however, armed with the undeniable text logs, shut down the argument completely. He stated in a very quiet, authoritative tone that her definition of relationship building had actively endangered the monarchy's future stability. The situation currently stands at an absolute administrative stalemate. The public continues to see a united front at official events, but the internal mechanics are completely severed. I will keep analyzing the structural changes being implemented behind these walls. Continue to subscribe so you do not miss the next phase of this internal reorganization, as the Waleses are preparing to launch a completely independent press strategy in the coming days. The days following the signing of the internal directive marked a complete restructuring of daily operations at Clarence House and Kensington Palace. The physical distance between the two households became a rigid, institutional boundary. William and Catherine strictly enforced a policy where no communications, regardless of how minor, were conducted over unencrypted or informal channels. Every request for schedule alignment now goes through a central, heavily monitored legal clearinghouse. Inside Kensington Palace, the atmosphere was focused and methodical. Catherine called a full meeting of her senior communications staff. Sitting at the head of the conference table, she reviewed the new security guidelines line by line. Her message to her team was simple: absolute operational transparency within their team and total containment regarding external interactions. There were no emotional outbursts or dramatic speeches. It was a pure exercise in corporate risk management. Meanwhile, King Charles attempted to navigate the personal and political wreckage left in the wake of the leak. He held a series of private, one-on-one meetings with his personal advisors to assess the damage to his own standing. The king was acutely aware that if these text messages were ever to leak to the public press, the credibility of his reign would suffer a catastrophic blow. His primary focus became containment, ensuring that the two dismissed aides remained bound by strict, enforceable non-disclosure agreements with significant financial penalties attached. Let us take a closer look at the actual text messages that triggered this structural lockdown. One exchange, dated just 3 months prior, explicitly detailed how Camilla's team leaked the exact timing of Catherine's return to public duties following her treatment. The text message from Camilla's senior aide read, "Publish the report on Catherine's delayed schedule tomorrow morning. It will draw attention away from the coverage regarding the Queen's charity expenses." This direct manipulation of information was designed to use Catherine's health narrative as a human shield for Camilla's press coverage. When Prince William originally discovered this specific log during the IT audit, his response was immediate. Behind closed doors in his private office, he called an emergency briefing with his legal team. He explicitly stated that targeting his wife during her medical recovery crossed every professional and personal line. William did not engage in a heated phone call with his father. Instead, he compiled the forensic evidence into the formal dossier that Catherine later presented, ensuring the king had zero grounds to dismiss the claims as simple family friction. The reaction of Queen Camilla during this period was one of quiet retreat. Deprived of her primary press strategists and stripped of her access to the master calendar, she spent most of her time at Ray Mill House, her private estate in Wiltshire. Away from the royal residences, she attempted to rebuild her internal communications strategy using personal devices. However, palace IT security had already implemented network monitoring protocols that effectively flagged any unauthorized contact with media figures. To understand the full scope of this operational separation, consider how joint engagements are now handled. Previously, a single master document outlined the movements of all senior royals. Now, two completely separate databases exist. If the king's team needs to know the Princess of Wales' availability for state banquet, a formal written request must be submitted to the Prince of Wales' private secretary, who reviews it with legal compliance officers before releasing basic time frames. Princess Anne's role during this phase became even more critical. Recognized by all parties as the most pragmatic member of the family, she acted as a silent mediator, not to repair relationships, but to enforce institutional stability. Anne met privately with King Charles at St. James's Palace. She told him directly that his primary obligation was to protect the succession, which meant backing William and Catherine unconditionally in this matter. She made it clear that any attempt to shield Camilla or soften the sanctions against her staff would compromise the monarchy's future. The Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh also maintained their firm distance. Sophie organized a series of independent engagements that deliberately bypassed any joint appearances with Queen Camilla. When questioned by royal logistics managers about the schedule changes, Sophie's office simply replied that her focus was entirely aligned with the core priorities set by the Prince and Princess of Wales. It was a subtle, highly effective demonstration of internal solidarity. Behind the scenes, the financial audit requested by William began to yield further details. Auditors discovered that discretionary funds intended for cultural patronages had been diverted to cover private consulting fees for external PR executives. These consultants were hired specifically to monitor and shape public perception of Camilla relative to Catherine. The paper trail was definitive, showing invoice descriptions that directly contradicted the stated charitable purposes of the funds. Faced with this financial evidence, King Charles had no option but to order a full reimbursement. He personally transferred funds from his private privy purse accounts to replenish the affected charitable funds, ensuring that no external financial irregularities could be detected by public oversight bodies. The transaction was handled with absolute discretion, but the internal record remains a permanent black mark against the Queen's administration. The physical environment within Clarence House during these weeks reflected the deep rift. Staff members described an environment of profound quiet. Conversations were brief, strictly professional, and limited strictly to basic administrative needs. The previous atmosphere of collaborative public relations planning was replaced by a rigid, compliance-driven structure. Catherine's approach throughout this ordeal has fundamentally redefined her position within the royal institution. She did not position herself as a victim, she positioned herself as an authority enforcing standard governance. By relying strictly on verifiable digital evidence, timestamp logs, and financial records, she effectively neutralized any attempt to frame the conflict as a personal argument between two senior royal women. As we look at the broader institutional impact, it is clear that the balance of power has permanently shifted toward Kensington Palace. Prince William and Catherine have demonstrated that they hold the operational high ground and will not hesitate to enforce accountability, even when it involves the highest-ranking members of the king's household. The structural firewalls established in that Tuesday morning meeting remain fully active today. The story of this internal betrayal highlights the shifting dynamics within the modern monarchy. Power, operational control, and strategic authority have effectively transitioned to the Prince and Princess of Wales. Their ruthless enforcement of corporate-level security and governance standards has set a new precedent for how the royal household will operate moving forward. Make sure to subscribe to stay informed as we continue to track the ongoing evolution of the royal infrastructure.